Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
We have just crossed the line of demarcation. It is past 4 p.m. Eastern, so the NFL season, off-season, is officially here. All the stuff that's been talked about for the last couple of days can officially become official starting now. And again, to all of what's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles, as well as his thoughts on what has happened so far, how it can impact the Eagles in the draft. And we got some texters who have already been texting in wanting to know Andrew's thoughts on things at 609-403-0973. Yes, it's Andrew DiCecco on a Wednesday. He usually comes on Thursdays on the Sports Bash, but he was kind enough to join us a day early this week because there's no shows tomorrow and Friday because of the NCAA tournament. Andrew, happy NFL New Year. How you doing?
Josh, I'm doing well, my friend. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. So let's get to the biggest news of the day. Give me your thoughts on Darius Slay, no longer a Philadelphia Eagle, and what do you think that means for the rest of the offseason moving forward?
Yeah, the Eagles just weren't able to make it work. The Eagles and Darius Slay just weren't able to make it work. I thought for sure they would, but, obviously Slay wanted an extension, and him being 32 years old, the Eagles just weren't going to comply with that. And I think that they sort of reached an impasse, and they had to make a decision, and they're going to be parting ways. And obviously not having him there is a substantial loss. I don't need to say what he brings from a leadership standpoint and an experience standpoint. He's still a number one corner. Obviously, his production sort of trailed off or tapered off, I guess you could say, on the second half of the season. But he quietly still was very productive, even though the numbers weren't there, the interceptions. And obviously, he's very respected around the league, and he's going to continue to play. I think he still has another year or two of high-level production. It's just a shame it wasn't able to work out. Him and James Bradbury had a really good relationship, and he was a really big advocate of Bradbury, and I thought that they were a really good tandem, really cohesive from the get-go. Now, not having Slay there, Bradbury becomes the number one, and now you still need to look at drafting a corner, I would think, with one of their first two first-round picks, because you have to get younger there.
Now, you mentioned Bradbury. What does no Slay mean for him? Because he's the one who got the bag yesterday. He's the one getting that solid NFL starting cornerback, all-pro kind of contract. So no Slay, how does that change things for Bradbury and Andrew? How does anything change in Desai's defense versus last year with Gannon?
Well, it's really going to be interesting because obviously Bradbury had some conversations with Sean Desai before making his decision, so he felt comfortable within the scheme. Obviously, a lot of it is going to be predicated on playing the Bradbury skill set. He doesn't have the long speed. He's an exceptional zone corner, Josh. Really good at reading quarterbacks' eyes, and one of the smartest defensive backs that I've ever had the privilege of covering. So I think that you need to cater to his skill set and run a system that if he's going to be your number one, which right now he is, you have to find a way to accentuate that. And sort of similar to what you saw last season with Gannon, I think you're going to want to see him. He's at his best in zone. You don't want to necessarily match him up in man because when he tended to get, when he does, he gets beat a little bit. I mean, I can remember a play against the Saints with Rashaad that he beat him down the right sideline there, and I think against the Texans and the Cowboys as well. But all that being said, I think that he is going to be certainly a capable number one. I thought that he was the more consistent player last season between the two corners, and I was really impressed with this play. I'm interested to see what he's able to do now as the top corner on this team, and also being a mentor for the young corner that they're inevitably going to have to draft this year. I think that he's a quiet leader. He's not someone that's very vocal, but he is an exceptionally smart player, and I think that he's going to be able to pass along a lot of his tools and some of the nuances and subtleties to his game to the younger players.
We know the Eagles could, in theory, draft a cornerback. So one of the questions that was asked, Andrew, is do you think it's better for the Eagles to draft a corner at 10 or go out and get another veteran to play across from Bradbury?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Josh? You broke up.
One of the listeners texted in asking, should the Eagles go and get a corner at 10 or should they get a free agent to start across from Bradbury?
That's a great question. And my answer to that right now, as we sit on March 15th, is to draft a corner at 10, right? I mean, they're very, they don't have a lot of youthful upside at the position. I do like Zach McPherson. He was a player that I viewed as a sleeper coming out of the draft a couple of seasons ago. Obviously, it hasn't materialized. I think he's an exceptional gunner, one of the best in the league, but they really don't have a young building block there. Looking at the 10 spot, Josh, they're going to have probably the option of picking between two blue chip cornerback prospects, and I think they need to strike while the iron's hot because this is a draft that's really brimming with cornerback talent. So that would be the route that I would go.
Now, we had a texter text in earlier that he thinks the Eagles should take Gonzalez from Oregon at 10. So talk to the audience about three specific players: Gonzalez, Witherspoon, and Joey Porter Jr. Like, compare and contrast so the audience knows who's what.
That's great. So Witherspoon, to me, if I'm going to equate him to an Eagles player that everyone will be well acquainted with, would be Sheldon Brown and his physicality, not his play style. He's a very smart player. He's scrappy. He fights to the end. He's a willing tackler on the perimeter. He's the type of player that I think would really benefit from in a defense that's about attacking, because he oozes athleticism and physicality. Now, Gonzalez, to me, is the most technically savvy and proficient out of all the corners in this draft class. 6'1", 197. He's got good length. He's athletic. He moves well. He's very fluid in his back pedal and changing of direction. He competes for the football. And going back to Witherspoon, where Gonzalez, I think, is really good in this area, as you know, being close to 200 pounds. Witherspoon's only about 180, 185 pounds. You would like to see him be able to develop his play strength to really translate, be able to translate and sustain his physicality and level of play at the professional level. That's the only concern that I would have with him there. Gonzalez, I believe, only had 4 interceptions in college, but I don't think that's an indication of what he's able to do. I think he's a ball hawk and a savvy player. Like I said, to me, him and Witherspoon are plug-and-play guys. Joey Porter is more of a rawer prospect, I would say, a ball hawk nonetheless, but I think that and scrappy, and I think sometimes he panics and his technique can get lost a little bit if he feels like he's getting beat. But so I have him trailing those other two just by a little bit. But for me, Witherspoon and Gonzalez, I mean, it's going to come down to what flavor do you prefer, because I think that both if you like vanilla, you like chocolate, you like strawberry, I think both players are going to be day one starters. It's just a matter of how you see them fitting within your system.
Now, with all that being said, who do you think makes the most sense for the Eagles and Sean Desai's system of those three?
Well, based on what we know, which is very limited information of Sean Desai's system, for me, I would say Christian Gonzalez, as far as just being an all-around corner, a technically savvy plug-and-play guy, a very refined skill set. I think you could swing for that and be confident that when you bring him in, he's going to be a really nice pairing opposite James Bradberry from day one, which is really what the Eagles need right now if they opt not to. Because, in the past couple of years, Josh, the Eagles have really benefited from the third wave of free agency and grabbing a Steve Nelson and a James Bradberry. But that's not necessarily the recipe for success. You don't want to bank on that every year. So the Eagles desperately need another starter. And I think if you take somebody like Christian Gonzalez, you really set yourself up for almost a sure thing. It's hard to ever say that with definitively, but I like his skill set.
Talk with Andrew DiCecco. Of course, check out all of his coverage of the Eagles and the NFL draft over at InsideTheBirds.com. You can follow Andrew on Twitter at Andrew DiCecco, just his full name on Twitter. Andrew, I want to ask you about Jalen Carter, because a lot of Eagle fans have been hoping and praying that Carter falls to them at 10, and his pro day didn't go very well today. Are you concerned about Carter as a prospect?
Well, there's a lot of things that are going against him right now, but all that said, the proof is in the pudding. And when I assess a prospect, I look at the tape, and the tape tells you what he is and what he's good at, and what he's going to, how he projects at the next level. And to me, some of these testing numbers, I mean, what are you able to produce on the field? The testing numbers are, that's sort of gravy. That's great if they perform well testing, but how many times have we seen players that have subpar testing days, but that doesn't necessarily translate onto the field. They play a lot faster. They play a lot more physical. Now, the question for me would become the off the field concern, because that's a very serious. He's facing a very serious situation right now, and that's not something that should be taken lightly. But given all the poking and prodding and bringing and that goes on with all these prospects, I think get some FaceTime with the prospect, ask him these questions, look him in the eye, figure out where he's coming from, have him walk you through the situation, to talk to past coaches, even beyond college, to get a is and really do your due diligence, because this is a player who, in most cases would be the number one, the top three, a top three pick. And I think that I think it's hard to foresee him tumbling, but if he does, if you're the Eagles and everything checks out, I think you have, even if he's within striking distance 6 or 7, I think you have to consider moving up for him, because that, to me, defensive tackle and linebacker, you could also say safety, that's that's a few of their most problematic areas right now in defense.
Let's flip it over to offense, Andrew. Over at InsideTheBirds.com, you wrote about Rashaad Penny. So I want you to do me a favor. I want you to sell me on the audience just on why Penny, who has missed a lot of games over the last few years, is an upgrade in your mind over Miles Sanders, who has been more available than Penny has over the last 3 seasons.
Well, it's a low-risk, high-reward type of signing, and I sort of equated to a number of years ago when the Eagles signed Ryan Matthews, a former first-round pick, who also struggled with injuries, but just a productive player when he's back there, physical. I think that in the case of Rashaad Penny, I think that you saw him, be dominant in short spurts, right? He's an explosive player. I think he has some nice acceleration and some juice, good patient vision. He's patient. He has good vision. Contact balance is pretty good. He's a better pass protector, but you worry about the injuries. I mean, he's missed 37 games in 4 years, so that is a concern. That's why he agreed to a modest price tag. But when you look at what the Eagles had from a skill set standpoint, I thought that they really needed to establish a power element on offense. I thought that was sorely lacking, and they were too overly reliant on Jalen Hurts being the short yardage runner. And I thought that when you have someone like a Boston Scott and a Kenny Gainwell, we'll see about Trey Sermon, but they really had a finesse backfield largely, and I thought that they really needed to pack a punch a little bit. Rashaad Penny gives them that. He takes a little bit of weight off of Jalen Hurts. Obviously, he's going to handle mostly the early down work. He doesn't factor into the equation much as a pass catcher, just 27 career catches. But I think that I don't view him as this bell cow that's suddenly going to be able to shoulder 18 to 22 carries a game, because I don't know that really lends itself for him being able to be healthy for a 17-game stretch. But I think you could see him, do 12 to 14 a game and complement with work in concert with Kenny Gainwell, maybe a little bit of a smattering of Boston Scott as well. I think that's going to be the way that he'd be best utilized. But I do think he adds a different dimension to the offense. And, he's not the player. He's not going to produce the highlight reels that a Miles Sanders would. But I think that what he brings from a skill set standpoint to the offense, which is already loaded, I think he was a missing dimension that I think is going to serve it well.
We know that he led the NFL back in 2021 in yards per attempt. I think it was 6.3 that season. So is that a fair expectation, is to say, hey, this guy might not get a ton of carries, but when he gets those carries, he's going to put a big number up there?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair to say. That's fair to say, especially with behind this offensive line, Josh. I mean, if he's able to stay healthy, I think that sort of production that he's been able to have in those short spurts, as brief as it may be, I think that's sustainable, especially within this offense. You've seen different running backs, no matter whoever they were putting back there, have a lot of success. Most recently, Kenny Gainwell. In the latter stages of the season, I think that offensive line, you put anybody back there essentially, and they're going to look good. And he's just such a patient runner and a between the tackles hammer that I think that his skill set really lends itself to being productive in the system.
Andrew, I want to ask you, staying on the offensive side of the ball, I know it's not a position people get very enamored with, but the backup quarterback is a conversation point. The news came out that the Washington Commanders are going to sign Jacoby Brissett. The Eagles were a team that was interested in Brissett. Where do you think they should go with the backup QB position now with Brissett off the market and the presumption that Minshew is going to go elsewhere?
Well, I mean, the market is quickly drying up. I don't know how many more options Gardner Minshew is going to have. I know he desires to be able to compete for a starting spot, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily work out or play into his favor. I mean, he's going to be an option if the price is right. Marcus Mariota would make a lot of sense, although he looked pretty cooked in the games that I saw him last year. Maybe he might be a good reclamation project. Has a sort of diversified skill set, much like Jalen Hurts. So having a veteran in the room, I think, would really serve him well as far as, what you're seeing out there, bounce ideas off of each other. I think that would be beneficial. But Mike White was a player that I had pegged as an intriguing option, being the veteran and having a little bit of success in his limited opportunities. I think he started 8 games for the past 2 years, but I think he went to the Dolphins, if I'm not mistaken. Quarterbacks are going. So, I mean, I think your options are going to be limited. I think it could come down to maybe Gardner, or I would consider Marcus Mariota. I would have to think.
I was having a debate with somebody on Twitter, and I want to ask your opinion. I'm a big believer in when you have a quarterback who's under the age of 29 and 30, I like to have a veteran in that QB room. And I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea. Like I remember when Wentz had Josh McCown and Nick Foles and Chase Daniel, he was one guy. As soon as his backup was Jalen Hurts and Nate Sudfeld, he was a different guy, for example, here in Philadelphia. I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea. Not that I don't believe in Jalen Hurts, but if your quarterback room is, let's say, Jalen Hurts, Ian Book, and fill in the blank draft pick, I'm just not that comfortable with that QB room.
Right, and the Eagles do like Ian Book, but and they want to get a long look at him this summer. But as a number 2, that's an enormous leap. Obviously, he does have a little bit of playing experience, but he's a young player. I have the same school of thought as you, Josh, as far as a veteran presence in the quarterback room. I think that's really beneficial. Someone that's seen it all, they're able to maybe they see things a different way than you see it on the field. They're an extension of a coach, essentially. And like I said, just being able to be able to bounce ideas off, or having seen different systems or face different coaches or coordinators. Hey, I faced this, at X point in my career. This is how I handled it, or whatever. I think that's enormously beneficial. And that's some of the stuff that Minshew, I talked to Minshew and Ian Book at the Super Bowl, because I was really interested in what their roles were from a preparational standpoint throughout the week in helping Jalen Hurts behind the scenes, because that's not something you often hear about. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I'm in the same school of thought as you. I think that they do need to target a veteran, however that may be, but I think they need to secure one in free agency.
And before I let you go, now that it's officially official that the Panthers have the number 1 overall pick, if Frank Reich got on the phone and called you, Andrew DiCecco, what are you telling Frank Reich the Panthers should do with the number 1 overall pick?
Well, you got to go quarterback. From what I understand, they really like C.J. Stroud. Bryce Young's a good prospect as well. I think I would go with C.J. Stroud. That would be the pick that I would have. They need to have a sustainable building block for the future at the quarterback position, and I think that moving forward, he offers some intrigue and upside, and someone that they can build around.
There he is. Follow him on Twitter at Andrew DiCecco. Check out all of his coverage of the Eagles and the NFL draft over at InsideTheBirds.com. Andrew, appreciate you jumping on a Wednesday, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. When we talk again soon, it'll be another week closer to the aforementioned NFL draft.
Looking forward to it, man. Take care.